Have you ever looked at a watercolor painting and thought, wow, that looks so real? But then you look at your own painting and wonder, why doesn't mine have that same wow factor? I get it, and you're not alone. The good news is, with just a few simple techniques and tips, you can make your watercolor paintings pop with life, vibrancy, and that realistic touch you've always dreamed of. Now, when we talk about making a watercolor painting look realistic, the first step is to define what realistic means to you. For some artists, realism might mean hyper-detailed, almost photographic paintings where every tiny detail is captured. But for others, a painting can still feel realistic even if it's looser or more abstract, because it's about capturing the essence of the subject, like its light, texture, or movement. So ask yourself, what kind of realism am I aiming for? Do you want to create a snapshot or a painting that feels real but leaves room for interpretation? For example, a landscape might not need every blade of grass to be hyper-realistic, right? It could be just about the colors, depth, and light interplay. And having clarity on this is crucial because if you don't know what you're aiming for, it's easy to feel stuck. Without defining good enough, it becomes hard to measure progress. Think of it like a roadmap. Once you know your version of realism, it's easier to focus on the techniques that will get you there. Now, let's talk about some common mistakes watercolor beginners and enthusiasts are making when striving for realism. The first mistake is not using the right supplies. I know, everyone talks about supplies and you're probably hoping for a secret technique while you're rolling your eyes, but hear me out. Your tools really are the foundation of your painting. The quality of your supplies, especially paper, can make or break your results. Realistic paintings often require layering, blending, and adjusting details, and low-quality paper can't handle that. It might buckle, absorb paint unevenly, or tear, leading to just blotchy, streaky results instead of lifelike effects. So the first step when you're frustrated with your painting is to check your supplies. Make sure you're using high quality watercolor paper. It will allow you to layer, blend, paint wet into wet, and use all sorts of techniques and achieve those subtle effects that make your watercolor pop. If you're unsure, I've got you covered. Make sure to download my free guide to watercolor supplies where I talk all about it. You can find a link in the description box down below. Now, the second common mistake I see a lot of watercolor beginners and enthusiasts are making is they don't use watercolor the way it's meant to be used. I often hear people say the paintings look flat, almost like a child painted them, or that they resemble paint by numbers rather than something more realistic. And this comes down to not fully understanding how to work with watercolor as a medium. And watercolor isn't inherently difficult, it's just different. Like any medium, it has its own rules, and once you understand them, it gets so much easier. And if you think about it, at its core, watercolor is just colored water. That means mastering it involves understanding how to manage it using the three key elements: your brush, your paint, and your paper. These are like the holy trinity of watercolor, and learning how they interact is crucial. And to use watercolor correctly, you need to understand techniques like wet and wet, layering, and how to control the flow of water and paint. And this is a topic I dive deep in my Roadmap to Watercolor Painting course. Because it's not just about what's happening on the paper, it's also about how much water is on your brush and how diluted your paint is and the timing of things. So these factors are all things that need to work together to create that balance of control and flow. Because a big part of making paintings look more realistic is working in a way that complements watercolor's natural qualities. Instead of treating it like a paint by numbers project, like filling out outlines with color, you want to embrace its uniqueness. Start by painting large shapes and background areas, then gradually work towards smaller details. I like to go from light to dark, layering as I go to build depth and contrast. This approach helps me create more dimension and a natural, cohesive look. Another mistake related to this is not paying enough attention to light and shadow, because a big part of realism is capturing light and shadow. And because watercolor is such a transparent medium, you can't just start with darks and then add some highlights here and there. You do want to start with the lightest areas first and then build up to the darkest. This creates depth and also makes your painting feel three-dimensional. But to do this effectively, again, you need good quality supplies, especially paper. If your paper can't handle layering or blending and really be at all this tweaking, it will start to fall apart or dry streaky before you can achieve those realistic effects. And if you're struggling with this, I invite you to join my upcoming Paint to Paper challenge. In this challenge, I'll show you how watercolor works and how to take control of your brush, paint, and paper to create beautiful, realistic paintings with ease. You'll not only improve your skills, but also gain confidence in leading the watercolor while still letting it work its magic. The link is in the description box below. Another common mistake I see people make is they dive straight into painting without a clear plan. Now, don't get me wrong, it's totally fine to paint spontaneously if that's what you enjoy. But if your goal is to create a painting that looks more realistic, having a plan can make all the difference. And planning starts with selecting a reference image and thinking through your approach. Ask yourself, where should I start? Do I begin with the background or the foreground? Should I lay down light colors first, or does it make sense to start with this section that is maybe slightly darker? What techniques do I need to make certain areas stand out or recede into the background? And the same goes for planning your colors. Often people use too many random colors that don't work well together, hoping for the best. But without planning it out, the result can feel scattered and like harmony. So choosing the right colors and mixing them properly is key to creating a cohesive painting that looks more realistic. That's why planning your painting is so crucial. It helps you outline the steps to start and finish your artwork using the right technique, as well as determine the colors you need to mix. For example, beginners might think, the grass is green, so let me grab a green. But there's so much more to it. Grass in sunlight looks different from grass in shadow. Those subtle nuances make a huge difference, and knowing how to mix the right colors helps you capture them. And this is something we talk about a lot in my watercolor membership, learning to observe your subject and also identifying the colors you actually need, not just the ones you assume are there. And if you're curious about where to start, I have a free guide to color mixing linked below this video. Now, again, you don't need all the answers in this planning stage right away, just a rough idea of where you're going. This way, when you start painting, you'll feel more in control and less panicked about what to do next, especially when the paint is drying faster than expected. And it's about being intentional while also staying flexible enough to adapt as you go. I also recommend starting small, literally. Instead of jumping into a large piece and expecting it to be a masterpiece on the first try, treat your first attempt as just a test. Use a smaller format to try out your techniques and ideas. You want to test, does your plan make sense? Is your technique working? Every reference might challenge you in different ways, so testing helps you figure out what works and what doesn't. And once you refine your approach and feel confident, you can always scale up and create the final piece. This way, painting becomes less about perfection and more about learning, experimenting, and improving with every step. Now, another common mistake people make is not fully observing what they're painting. Instead of painting what they actually see, they tend to paint what they think they see. Like I mentioned earlier, when looking at grass, you might assume it's just green, but in reality, there are often subtle variations, like areas of light and shadow. The same goes for painting a tree bark, for example. Instead of really observing the texture, shape, and nuances in color, people may just paint it based on what they think a tree bark should look like. And to capture realism, whether hyperrealistic or more abstract, you need to pay attention to the details that make something what it is. So look at a tree bark, for instance. Is it rough or smooth? What colors do you see? What's the shape or thickness? The same goes for something like a round mug. To paint it realistically, you need to pay attention to its roundness and maybe even the light and shadow, the form, not just paint it as a simple shape. Another great example is a lush grass field. Instead of painting every blade of grass, which you can't even see fully when you look at it closely, right? You want to focus on the larger nuances, darker and lighter patches, dots and colors that convey that lushness. So this is about stepping away from assumption and really training your eye to notice what's there, not just what your brain thinks should be there. And being present and intentional in your observations will help you create a more realistic, compelling painting. The details and these really special nuances you see are what bring life to your subject. So really train yourself to observe before you begin painting. And one important thing to consider is when to actually stop the process of creating your painting. And one thing I always consider is how long I've been working on a painting. Now, if I've been at it for too long, I start to lose perspective. Because you can become blind to the painting, unable to tell if it's truly finished or if something needs tweaking. That's why I always recommend stepping away and taking a break. When you come back to it with fresh eyes, it's much easier to see what's really needed and if it's actually needed. Oftentimes, when you don't step away, you start thinking things like, oh, maybe I should add this or change that, but you're not sure if it's necessary. You're not in the right mindset, and your mind is not as fresh to be able to actually judge your painting correctly. And when you step back, you can think more clearly about whether an addition will actually enhance the painting or just overwork it. Another trick I like is to take a photo of my painting and turn it into a black and white version. This helps me to see the values more clearly. So if I notice areas where the contrast is too low, I can adjust those parts to create more depth and make the painting feel more three-dimensional. But again, I only do this once I've given myself some space from the painting. And if you're ever unsure about whether something adds to your painting, you can also listen to your instinct. Is it really necessary? Will it make the painting better or just overcomplicate it? The best approach is really just leave it and step back and trust that your instincts will guide you once you return. Remember, if you're unsure, there's always tomorrow. Give yourself the time and space to look at it with fresh eyes the next day, and you'll be able to see exactly what needs tweaking or if it's just perfect the way it is. And one of the last tips that I want to share has something to do with mindset. And one of the most important mindset shifts for me was realizing that watercolor painting is always a work in progress. What might look super realistic for me now will likely evolve over time. You'll start noticing more details, more nuances, and eventually things you didn't see before you actually start seeing. So my biggest tip is to understand that realism, or what you see as realistic, is always evolving. It's also important to be clear on what realism means to you at this stage of your journey. What you aim for might shift as you grow as an artist, and that's totally okay. That's important, actually. If you don't notice every detail or nuance at first, don't worry. the more you practice and pay attention to what you're painting, the more you'll notice those subtleties and be able to improve your work. With time, using the right techniques, tools, and strategies, things will get easier. Like I mentioned earlier, watercolor isn't about hoping for the best and panicking through the process. It's about having a clear plan, knowing what to focus on, and troubleshooting when necessary. But most importantly, it's about persistence. It's not about giving up when things don't work out, because it's a journey where you become more skilled, more observant, and more confident in what you're creating. And watercolor also teaches you about patience and being present. If you rush through a painting, it can often become a mess, just like in life. It's often a reflection of where you might rush or where you're not truly present. So it's a good practice tool for slowing down and being more intentional, not only in your painting, but in your life. How you approach challenges, problems, or even everyday activities can relate to how you approach your art. Remember, how you do one thing is how you do everything. So don't be too hard on yourself, and trust that you'll learn the lessons you need through the process. The most important part is just to keep going. Put pen to paper, take action, and keep moving forward. You've got this.